Hello, everyone. Welcome to the Advancement Center, and welcome to the world of magic and miracles. I'm broadcasting today from my home in Solvang, California, and I'm going to be doing something that I have started to do, but haven't had a chance to really complete it, and that is reading the book entitled The Magic of Life by Robert Young. This is an amazing book, and I have read it a few times, but I wanted to share it with as many people as possible. And I wanted to lend my voice and my essence and my feeling to the words that are magnificent. The story paints a picture of the magic of life that each of us are experiencing in our own way. The story transcends time. It's always relevant. And I'm going to be reading different chapters each week, or as often as I choose to, as I go along. So here's the cover of the book. And I'll just read the back. The magic of life is a transformational story of the inhabitants of an island called Isles, in an undefined location, possibly in the Pacific Ocean. The island has two distinct and separate communities that are completely unaware of one another, apart from the secret few with access to both areas. This book is based on many intimate stories of transformation, spiritual interactions, healing, excitement, personal and technical achievement, and most of all, the overall story of life that starts with devastating circumstances and through many thrilling events ends up with a magical twist that leaves the reader with a calm sense of harmony and delight. This book is not meant to be a literary masterpiece, but a channeled gift that will melt your heart and excite your spirit. So today I'm reading chapter 1 through 10, The Magic of Life by Robert Young. It was September 13th, and the wind felt cold and miserable as Suzanne struggled to hold her coat close to her body. The tears were still fresh on her face, and her body felt like it had been torn apart by the emotion of the past few days. Her toes were still numb from the long trek she had traveled the previous day, and the memory of the chill seemed to linger in her bones as the wind started to blow through her clothing once again. Suzanne's fixed purpose was to provide for her children, but her efforts of the previous day had proven to be fruitless. Her regular source of food was not available, and there was nothing to feed her family. Today she headed off along the same track, but this time she would visit all the local fishing spots to see if she could find some relief. Suzanne's fear was so intense that it almost took over her body, and she was struggling to take each step. Her decision yesterday to leave the children at home had torn her apart, and here she was doing it again. The children were too young to have to take care of themselves, but somehow she knew it had to be done. It was a significant time in their lives, as their father Joe had died the previous year, and as a family, they knew they were in for some hard times. Suzanne had battled along with the children, lived in fear of what would happen to them all. Suzanne felt so alone, and each day seemed to get longer as the task became harder, and she struggled to survive against the increasing panic that ravaged her body. Suzanne had forgotten all about her friends and those who could help her, and was almost to the point where her brain and her body were ready to give up. The wind blew and the drizzling rain began to play tricks with Suzanne's eyes. The clouds were low and the mist of the morning hung like a mystic curtain, always out of reach and just in front of Suzanne's vision. No matter which way she turned, it was all the same. Although her mind was ravaged with fear, there was a hidden sense that detected something different in the countryside. The strange cloud that appeared in front of her suddenly shook her into awareness and exploded her senses into a scream that was so intense its sound disappeared before it left her mouth. Suzanne froze, and the panic suddenly turned into a clarity that she had never felt before. Her sense of survival was at its maximum, and her focus and intensity were beyond belief. Suzanne scanned the path ahead, never taking her eyes off the strange vision in front of her. The rain seemed to stop just up ahead, but the cloud was slowly moving towards her. She could feel her skin start to tingle. It was like something had started that was completely out of her control, and in place of her fear, a feeling of determination had come over her. She considered stepping back, but nothing seemed to happen. It was as if she was being drawn forward, and as she took that next step, she went into the cloud and almost passed out from the rush of adrenaline that followed. In that moment, Suzanne forgot the outside world and disappeared into the ecstasy and beauty of the wonderful world of magic she had stepped into. The hardship she had experienced moments before had gone, and she marveled at the joy of standing tall in the face of everything that was happening. Suzanne could feel her confidence growing as she calmed herself and allowed the haze of her experience to subside. She focused on the faint image in front of her and watched patiently as it formed into the shimmering outline of a person. She had never experienced anything like this before, but somehow she felt comfortable just standing motionless and letting everything unfold. The longer she stood and watched, the clearer the image became, until there, standing before her, was a great friend she had known through many ages. He introduced himself as Simeon. Suzanne felt elated. She had never experienced such a sensation, and she certainly had never seen anybody appear from a cloud before. Strangely, though, she felt incredibly comforted by the whole event. It was as if she had stepped into another world where all of the circumstances around her were totally different. She felt beautiful once again, and her dry skin and matted hair were suddenly transformed. Her clothes looked better, and she really felt like she was starting to glow. Simeon's voice was gentle and welcoming. He understood that she had never experienced such a thing before, and he was extremely conscious of the fragile nature of her situation. "You seem lost, my beautiful one," he began. Suzanne relaxed as he spoke. She felt drawn towards his energy and almost unconscious of the content of his words. Simeon continued, "We have been watching you, and we understand your struggle. You have been through a lot, and now I would like to help you. Suzanne stood motionless. He turned slowly and continued, "Follow me and we will get food for your children. I want to show you how to move on to a different life." The small island on which Suzanne lived was a place of beauty, with its harsh and rocky landscape and its wind-blown shores, in contrast with the gentleness of the tree-lined hills in the distance. It was something beyond imagination. The life that Suzanne knew was simple but limited to this place where she was born. So when Simeon said, "Move to another life," she had no concept of what he was saying. There were no boats that could take her away from this island, apart from the ship that came in once a month for supplies. It took one or two visitors backwards and forwards, and occasionally one of the technicians who ran the power station. And apart from that, there was no other way to move to another life. As her mind struggled with this lack of understanding, she felt a little disoriented, and soon let go of her struggle to watch the vision of Simeon's magic develop in front of her. A vision appeared in front of her. She could see her children running around, enjoying themselves, laughing and playing, looking bright and healthy, with no trace of fear or hardship. Suzanne blinked and looked around, but she could only see the vision in front of her. She watched intently, and then, as quickly as it appeared, it disappeared. The picture had vanished, but it had been imprinted in Suzanne's heart as something more important than reality itself. Suzanne willingly followed Simeon, totally unconcerned about her well-being, and acknowledging that she felt unusually fit and happy. As she walked along, she felt the spring come back into her step, and her fairy-like nature returned. They reached the waterfront where the fishermen normally gather, but to her surprise, there was nobody around. They walked down to the small deserted jetty and looked out to where the fishing boats were moored. Everything seemed peaceful and calm, and Simeon turned with a serious look on his face and waved his hand slowly over the jetty. The air seemed to shimmer like a mirage. Then suddenly several baskets of fish fillet and shellfish appeared before her. It was like a banquet laid out ready to eat. Oh, if only I could carry all of this and take it back to my children. Just as the thought appeared, the banquet lifted off the ground and slowly moved forward, disappearing into the surrounding mist that Suzanne had not noticed since she first stepped into it. She immediately turned to Simeon. "What happened?" "Your wish has been granted. The fish will be taken back to your children," he said. "There is too much for our family," replied Suzanne. Simeon smiled and quietly said, "Let's walk back to your house and feed the children." As they walked along the path, Simeon seemed to become real, and Suzanne felt that she needed to reach out and touch him. She could hardly believe the love that existed between them. Her senses became sharp, and her whole body tingled with excitement. Simeon had been with her for 10 minutes, but it seemed like a lifetime. Simeon's love was something she could never explain, and all of the strange things that had happened around her seemed so natural. In the distance, Suzanne could see the little cottage coming into view around the edge of the cliff. Her feelings were high, and the sight of the cottage triggered her emotions. She turned around quickly, wrapped her arms around Simeon, and gave him a hug. She could not believe this feeling inside her. It was as if he had melted straight into her being, and they both stood there in the magical essence as one. As her focus returned, she pulled back, but was unable to speak. She wanted to say so much, to express her thanks to him, but was unable to utter a word. Simeon smiled and said, "Yes, I'm real, and everything is okay. Now let's go and feed the children." They walked into the house, and suddenly all of the fish appeared on the kitchen table. The children jumped with joy, and Suzanne could see the life coming back into their little bodies. The heavy atmosphere that had been in the house for months suddenly lifted, and laughter and happiness came back into the family. Suzanne quickly set about preparing and cooking a beautiful meal, and she thought of Joe and his continuous struggle to provide the abundance she was experiencing at the moment. He had always provided for his family, but he knew that their destiny had to change. When his boat capsized and he was lost to the darkness of the sea, Suzanne remembered very clearly the promise that he always made. "If ever I am taken by the sea, you and the family will be looked after. I have been told by God, and there is no doubt." And now, if he could look down on what was happening, he would be overjoyed by the vision. Suzanne had no idea why, but she had this wonderful feeling of complete trust and happiness, and a feeling that she was experiencing being looked after, as Joe had promised. Once the children had eaten, Simeon suggested they invite others in to eat. It was then that Suzanne realized she had been staying away from all of her friends. With all of the hardship, she had reached a point where she couldn't face anyone, and to go out now to offer them food seemed so difficult. She was frightened, but Simeon simply looked at her and smiled, and the courage she needed came back to her immediately. Suzanne's life had become so distorted by fear and tragedy that she forgot how close her neighbors were. Only a few minutes down the road, and she could see her long-lost friends. These were the people she had lived with all her life, but had pulled away from because of her circumstances. Suzanne put on her coat and headed off to see her friends. She hoped that the food would stay warm, but quickly forgot as she met each of her friends. They were excited and happy for her, and were happy to follow her back to the house and enjoy a huge feast. Within the space of 4 hours, Suzanne's life was back to normal. Happiness was bubbling through her body, and the magic of the world was once again obvious to her. She looked around the crowd for Simeon. "Do I have to move?" she asked as she turned to face him. "You have moved, Suzanne. It all may look the same, but it doesn't feel the same. You have actually moved a long, long way from where there was hardship to where there is joy and happiness, and the world has allowed you to do that without any objection at all," answered Simeon. Suzanne wondered at the simplicity of what had happened and how it had been possible for the magic that had just played out in front of her. She wondered about the major difference in herself and her children and friends. It was all because of the intervention of one person and the provision of one meal. Everybody's life had changed in that very short period of time. Suzanne wondered if Simeon would be around all of her life. "How long are you staying?" she asked him. "I have always been with you and always will. There will come a time when I return to earth and you will know me again. But on this occasion, I am here for a short time to help you see the simplicity of what is needed to make your life full." Suzanne's face glowed, and the people around her were excited. They listened intently, but had no idea that Simeon had moved heaven and earth to come and stand before Suzanne so that she might know she could change and move on. Suzanne could not describe what Simeon had done, but the essence of her whole being clearly reflected the amazing results. Suzanne and her friends enjoyed a beautiful time together, but it was soon time to sleep. It wasn't long after everyone had gone home and the children were in bed that Suzanne fell into a peaceful, dream filled sleep. The dreams were clear and as exciting and almost as amazing as the day she had just left behind. She saw so many things and received so many instructions that it seemed like the night would never end. Not once did she wonder where Simeon had gone. He was there when she went to sleep. He was there in her dreams, and she was sure that when she woke in the morning, he would be there again. Chapter 2. Suzanne opened her eyes slowly and felt the listless shadow of sleep creep in and take her into that special space where she felt perfect peace. Her eyes closed and she drifted off into the silence of oblivion that she had treasured all her life. She looked around and for a moment her energy dropped. Within an instant she heard Simeon announce, "I'm still here." Suzanne burst into tears of joy at the happiness she had just been shown. Outside, the wind had died down, and the view from the front window of her house had transformed into something of absolute beauty. Suzanne wondered about the misery that she had seen out of her window the previous day, which had mysteriously changed in one short day to paradise. The color of the water had changed, the sound of the waves was gentle, and the sun was actually shining. It was as if her whole world had changed. Suzanne moved away from the front window and her eyes scanned the small cottage. Much to her surprise, there was food everywhere. Not just leftovers, but food that her friends had brought over, cakes and breads and treats that was sufficient to feed them all for a month. There was good, wholesome food, and it was everywhere. She wondered where it all came from and how she would store it all. Just then, young Jamie came racing into the room saying, "Mommy, Mommy, look what I've got." And there in her hand was a beautiful handmade doll. It was something that captured Suzanne's heart straight away. It was soft and fluffy, and it had character in its face. It was also so sweet and cuddly. "Isn't it beautiful?" she said to Jamie as she crouched down and placed her arms around her. Jamie's eyes were so bright and alive. She was excited and she immediately pulled at Suzanne. "Come on, Mommy, let's see the rest of our presents." She grabbed Suzanne by the hand and took her out into the kitchen. And there on the table was a small Christmas tree with a handwritten note in beautiful writing that said, "There is more to magic than just tricks. Enjoy the rest of your life. Lots of love, Simeon." Tears came to Suzanne's eyes as soon as she started to read, and Jamie, Samuel, and Martha all cried with her. Each of them had their own little toy, and each of them was so happy. It seemed like Jamie was taking Suzanne on a tour as she grabbed her mother's hand again. "Come on, Mommy, come on," demanded Jamie as she dragged Suzanne into the bedroom where the three children slept, and there on their little beds were new cotton covers to keep them warm. Each one contained such beautiful colors to brighten up their day. "Look at this," said Jamie and Samuel excitedly as they jumped up and down on their beds and squealed. Martha cried and hugged her mother while she patted the bed. It was such a beautiful moment. It was at that point when Suzanne began to miss the presence of Simeon. She could feel Joe still watching over them, but she missed Simeon, and Joe knew the reason why. Simeon and Suzanne had been so close over many, many years, and Joe felt proud to be able to assist in the short number of years he had been together with Suzanne. Suddenly there was a knock at the door, and it felt like they had all snapped out of a trance. They each ran out to open it, one behind the other, and as the door swung open, they saw a young fisherman standing there. The fisherman greeted Suzanne. "I knew you needed something to eat, and I've been fishing for days. I've caught you some fish. I also heard that you had a party last night and that everybody came along, but I couldn't get here. I was busy cleaning all of the fish and had to put them into cold storage." "Oh, Bill," said Suzanne, "I'm so glad you're here. I've got so many things to tell you. Please come in." Bill was still talking as he walked through the door, and while I was putting the fish into cold storage, this amazing thing happened to me. "And while I was walking down to the jetty yesterday, this amazing thing happened to me," said Suzanne at the same time. They both stopped and looked at one another and smiled. Then Bill, being a gentleman, said, "Well, you tell me what amazing thing happened to you." "No, you tell me first," said Suzanne. Bill's eyes lit up as he explained, "I just finished cleaning the fish and I was thinking about you. I always think about you, but I've never thought of you before as anyone more than a great friend, someone I've grown up with, and I was so sad for you when Joe died. I've done the best I can to look after you, and I felt like I've been failing. Even though it had nothing to do with me, I still felt a sense of failure. But then out of nowhere, this voice said, 'Bill, Suzanne needs you.' But I just shook my head and kept working. Then it said it again, 'Bill, Suzanne needs you.'" Suzanne sat and listened attentively to Bill's story. Bill continued, "I stopped and looked up and saw a figure standing in front of me, a beautiful man who was sort of standing a fraction above the ground, and he was glowing. I asked him, 'Did you speak?' And he replied, 'I did.' I waited, but he never said another word," said Bill. "I asked him, 'Did you say Suzanne needs me?' And he said, 'I did.' So I asked, 'Now?' And he answered, 'No, forever.' So I sat down, but didn't know what to do next. I looked away and I looked back, and he was still there. I was just about to speak to him again, but he'd gone. So I've been sitting on the edge of the water for the last hour, wondering what I should do, and then the voice came again. 'Suzanne needs you.' So here I am." Suzanne jumped up and wrapped her arms around him. "Oh, Bill, that's so beautiful, and I do need you. I can tell you all about the person who spoke to you. Come and have a look around the house." Bill had no idea what was going on, for he was feeling quite peculiar. Somehow he had known deep inside that he loved this lady. She would walk past him every day and say hello with a great big smile, even though she was in trouble. Suzanne was someone he had gone to school with, he'd played with, he'd fished with, and had fun with, but never had he felt the way he was feeling at that moment. Never had he felt that way about anybody, and to be in such close proximity to the girl who he'd wrestled with many times was totally unbelievable. His feelings were such that he was almost jumping out of his skin. His ability to focus on anything was almost zero. So when Suzanne told him, "Come and have a look around the house," he had trouble focusing and understanding what she was saying. He simply looked around the house, a house that looked like any other. Suzanne turned to him with joy and said, "Have a look at all this food. Have a look at all the gifts. Come and have a look in the children's room." It struck him then, and he asked, "Where did all this come from?" "I'm not sure, but I know it had something to do with the same person who appeared to you." I know a lot of the food came from our friends, but friends who didn't have any food before, friends who were as bad off as we were. And suddenly, out of nowhere, here's this Christmas tree and note and these coverings for the beds. Feel them, they're real, said Suzanne as she showed everything to Bill. Bill leaned over and felt the cotton bed covers. He was so amazed at how soft they were and how warm they felt. He immediately turned to Suzanne and said, "They feel like magic." "They are magic, and you're magic, and everything around here is magic," she said as she smiled gently. Bill almost exploded inside with joy and happiness. He gently put his arm around Susan and said, "You know, Susan, I think I love you." Suzanne responded, and they embraced and held each other with such relief and joy in their hearts. It seemed like there was no one else in the house. Everything was so quiet and peaceful. When they finished their embrace, they looked around at the three beautiful children standing there, just looking with their eyes wide open and big grins on their faces. When Suzanne looked at them and smiled, they started to giggle. They giggled and giggled until they began laughing and then ran off to play with their beautiful new toys. Bill had no idea where to go from there. He just stood there watching all of this, knowing that it was all going to be part of his life, yet having no idea how to approach it, or to plan it, or even to mention it. That was until Suzanne turned around and said, "Come and sit down, Bill. I want to talk to you." Suzanne and Bill sat down at the table that she could never get clean, but somehow it now looked like it was sparkling. "I'm going to make you a cup of tea, and I want to talk to you seriously about the picture that just came to me. I also want to talk to you about Simeon, the person who appeared to you and who appeared to me," said Suzanne. Bill responded immediately. He sat and waited with anticipation. Suzanne walked over to the stove that had been burning since early morning and put the kettle on before coming back and sitting down. Suzanne explained, "Bill, the picture that came to me was extensive, and it may sound a little strange when I put it to you, but there is something driving me at the moment that I don't understand. I'm sure that it's the same thing that is driving you." Bill was fascinated, but did not say anything. He had sat and listened intently to what Susan had to say. She continued, "All of my life, I have known that there is somebody here on earth that I would settle down with properly, and I've always known there was somewhere outside of here where I would feel totally calm and happy. I'm now starting to see the picture. You see, Simeon appeared to me on the track that leads down to the jetty. He actually walked with me and spoke with me. He's real. I actually put my arms around him and gave him a kiss, and I could feel his beauty. I felt a connection between the two of us. It was absolutely amazing, and I've just felt that same connection when you and I were together. So somehow, what Simeon has passed on to me when I kissed him is passed on to me each time I am close to you." "It's funny," said Bill. "I couldn't believe the feelings I had when I stood next to you, and I'm still having those feelings. It's something that I've never experienced before. It's out of this world." Suzanne couldn't believe her ears. This was the exact picture she had seen many years ago. It was like deja vu, only better. This was actually happening. The other must have been a dream. No, it couldn't have been, she thought. It was the same, so it had to be real. "Bill, when Simeon took me down to the jetty, all of this food appeared," she said. "It was the best fish catch that I've ever seen on this island, and all of it was brought back to this house. How did it, how did he, how he did it, I don't know. It was just like it lifted off the ground and disappeared into the cloud that surrounded us. And when we got back to the house, there it was again. along with the tree and the note. "What note?" asked Bill. "I've got to show you this note," said Suzanne. But as she handed it to Bill, it disappeared, and a tear came to her eye. "The note's obviously for me. I feel sad that I've lost it," she said. Just then a voice spoke to her clearly. It said, "Many things are given to you so that you can grow and so that you can add your essence to the world. That gift is passed on, and even though you're excited about it, you may lose it. So describe what has been given to you. Don't pass it on. Describe it by showing its effect on you." There were such a lot of words for Suzanne to catch, but the feelings were clear and she smiled. She allowed herself to glow and shimmer the way Simeon had shown her, and she watched the response in Bill's eyes. She was certainly glowing, and so was he. "Well, that was a big one," said Suzanne. "So as you can see, much of what has been given to me is magic, and you can see that some really special things have taken place. I feel wonderful, and I wish to stay feeling this good, and for that to happen, I would like us to stay together." Once again, Bill could hardly contain himself. He almost burst with joy, and the tears came to his eyes as he said, "I have no idea what to say. I don't know what to do or what we've got to do, but yes, I'd love for us to be together." Just then, at that moment, the three children ran in and sat down at the table. Bill smiled and said, "Yes, and you and you and you, we will all be together." They all cheered and laughed and had a wonderful time. Suzanne knew that she didn't have to pass on the picture. It had already occurred. So I'll stop there for today. I hope you enjoyed that. It's amazing for me to read it. I'm right in the story. So with that, I thank you for listening. I thank you for joining me. And until next time, I wish you a perfect life, perfect health, and a magic future. Thank you.